if you want to follow along. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers ye shall send a man, every one a leader among them. So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of God, all of them men who were heads of the children of Israel. Then Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said to them, Go up this way into the south, and go up into the mountains, and see what the land is like. Wherever the people who dwell in it are strong, whether they are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are the camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are forests there or not. Be of good courage, and bring some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. Now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron, and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told them and said, We went to the land where you sent us. It truly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites and Jebusites and Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the river Jordan. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are able to overcome it. But the men who had gone up with him said, We're not able to go up against this people, for they are stronger than we, and they have the children of Israel. They gave the children of Israel a bad report on the land which they had spied out, saying, The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight.
And I'd like you to think not a special music, the songs I'm going to play, but as meditation in preparation for the presentation that Greg has for us in the Bible. I'm going to be playing two songs, I Am Not Worthy, and He's Only a Prayer Away. So take this opportunity to meditate.
Well, good morning. It's good to see each of you here today, that you have come to worship in God's sanctuary like I have. And I'm always grateful for the opportunity I have to be able to come and speak to you and tell my story. But to be truthful, I'm having a hard time deciding where to start today. My story is familiar to you, at least a lot of it, but some of the things I share today may come as a surprise to you. So where to start? I guess I better start by introducing myself so you know who I am. My name is Caleb. You know me because of my partnership with Joshua. And we were chosen 2 of the 12 spies that went in to scope out the promised land. But before I start talking to you about that, there's some other things that we need to talk about to lay the groundwork for what will come. So, to get us there, we need to start with Moses. There's much you already know about Moses. His birth came at a time when the proclamation had been made that all the Hebrew boys should be killed because the Pharaoh and the Egyptians were concerned that they were growing in size too much. So they figured if they took out the guys, that'd kind of slow down the process. So the fact that his mother managed to hide him for 3 months, babies cry. Somebody should have heard. But nobody did. But that point came when she said, I need to do something. So she created a basket that would float. She put this precious little baby in that basket and set it afloat down on the Nile River. Providentially, it was found by Pharaoh's daughter, who happened to be down there bathing in the river that morning. That's where Miriam, Moses' sister, comes in. She offers to find a nurse for the baby. Imagine that. And that nurse happens to be Moses' mother. I think it's more than happenstance. And as God planned and orchestrated all this part of the story, Moses' parents were able to raise him for the first 12 years of his life, instilling in him a knowledge of who the God Jehovah was, to prepare him for what would come. At 12 years of age, he thoroughly knew who the God of the Hebrews was before she had to turn him over to Pharaoh's daughter. It's just, to me, an amazing story. So Moses remained in Egypt until he was 40 years old, being trained and indoctrinated into the Egyptian thinking and practices, but ever in his own mind, remaining faithful to the God of heaven and his people. He saw the unjust treatment of the Hebrews, and that is what led him to do a not very wise thing, to kill one of those Egyptian taskmasters, which forced him to have to flee from Egypt for his life. And then Moses spent the next 40 years wandering in the wilderness as God worked on his heart to nurture him to become the leader that he needed to lead his people out of Egypt and into the promised land. And when the time was right, Moses spotted that burning bush, and God told him that he had seen the affliction of his people, and Moses was the one who was chosen to lead his people out of Egypt and to the promised land. Was Moses excited about this call? He gave every excuse in the book as to why he wasn't the right one to do this. But God had chosen him. God had to do some work, yes, but God promised that throughout the whole process, he would be with Moses, that Moses would not have to do this on his own. As you remember, he went to come before Pharaoh, and the meetings didn't go well as he expected. So God had to send the 10 plagues that fell upon the Egyptians, but not the Hebrews. And that's a fact that was noticed by the people in Egypt. At that point, they noticed this group of people have some special protection from the being that they call their God. Oh, I remember those plagues well, as if they just happened yesterday. Each one that progressed through, sometimes it looked like Pharaoh was going to say, okay, get out of here. And then his heart would be hardened. And he'd say, you're not going anywhere. We need you here. But the 10th plague was different. I hear you just studied about that today in your lesson time. That 10th plague, it was the most profound because each Hebrew family had to kill a perfect lamb, and then with a bunch of hyssop, they had to spread that blood on the doorpost above and on the 2 side posts, so that when the destroying angel came through, he would know that this was a house that God was in charge of, and the people inside were protected, and the death angel would pass by, see the blood, recognize it as a Hebrew home, and bring no harm to that family. They were also ready to leave on a moment's notice because God had warned them. Because God knew that when this final plague hit Pharaoh's own home and took his firstborn son, that he was finally going to be convinced to let the children of Israel go. And so, that evening, Pharaoh's firstborn son died at the hand of the destroying angel. And in the middle of the night, Pharaoh said, bring Moses and Aaron to me. They went and got them and brought them, and he gave the command, go. Before the first light of dawn, we began our journey into the desert, our journey to the promised land. God led us to the Red Sea, where we witnessed the miraculous parting of the waters, and we walked across on dry land. It was really fun watching the kids, because they'd walk up to the edge and kind of poke their finger in the water, and then they'd pick up a shell or a pretty rock, or they'd just go and stand there and look in the eyes of a fish looking back at them. It was an amazing experience as we went through the water like that. It was fun watching that, but it was not fun seeing when Pharaoh's army came charging in from the other side, where we had come from, and they were not going to let us get away that easy. It's interesting that Moses displayed no fear at that time. A lot of the people started freaking out, but Moses felt no fear, and he relayed the message that God had given him. Fear not, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show you today. For the Egyptians you have seen today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you will hold your peace. And he did. As Moses stretched out his arm with his staff, the waters came crashing down as though they were eager to swallow up that Egyptian army. And they disappeared into their black depths. God was true to his word. Pharaoh's army was gone. You think that would have made a deep impression on the people, don't you? Well, let's go on with the story. There's so much I could tell you time will not allow all of the parts, but suffice it to say that too soon, once again, the people forgot about God's divine intervention. And they persisted with their grumbling and complaining. God provided food when they needed food, which was every day. He always provided water. And at times, if they didn't see any water, they freaked out and said, we're gonna die of thirst. But he had everything covered. He provided a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night to guide them. And then there was the battle with the Amalekites, where as long as Moses held up his arms, the Hebrews were winning the battle. How long can you hold your arms up before they slowly start sinking down? So we had Aaron and Hur who came up and helped him hold his arms up, and they won the battle. And then we journeyed on to Mount Sinai, where Moses received the 10 Commandments. And you remember that the people thought Moses was dead on the mountain and demanded that Aaron make them a god so that they could worship this God. Come on, people. What are you thinking? That did not go well. And God said, Moses, you better get down there because things aren't good in the camp. Moses had to continually intercede for these stubborn Hebrews because God at times wanted to wipe them all out. But Moses always stood up, and there was always a remnant who were faithful to God and kept in mind that God had promised a land flowing with milk and honey, which would be our new home. We finally found ourselves camped at Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran on the borders of the promised land. It was here that it was proposed that spies be sent into the land to check things out, to survey the land. So Moses presented the idea to God, and permission was granted with the direction that one of the rulers of each of the 12 tribes should be chosen for this purpose. 12 of us were chosen, and that's when Moses then gave us our directions as to what we were going to do when we went into the land. Go see the country. Look at the features of the land. Are there any natural advantages? How are things situated? Especially look at the people. Are they strong, or do they appear to be weak? Are there few, or are there many? And bring back some fruit of the land for us to see and sample. So off they went. They surveyed the whole land, entering from the southernmost border and proceeding all the way to the northern extremities. Now imagine what you would think if you were one of those people dwelling in Canaan and you saw these 12 people kind of sneaking around, looking at things. They're dressed totally different than you are. You know they don't belong there. So you begin to wonder, who are these strange people? Well, after 40 days of exploring the land, the people of Israel were cherishing high hopes and eagerly awaiting a report. And we returned with samples of the fruit grown there, showing the fertility of the soil. It was a season for grapes, and I've got some grapes here, but these are nothing like the ones that we found there and brought back. The bunches of grapes were so big, we had to carry them on a stick between two people. There were figs, and the figs were bigger than your figs here today, but they were good figs. They tasted quite good. I shouldn't be eating in front of you. I'm sorry. I do have a couple more here. There were pomegranates that also grew there. Joshua and I reported, "It is indeed a land flowing with milk and honey. The land which God has promised us is indeed a wonderful place." But after we described the beauty and the fertility of the land, the other 10 spies began their reports. They began to talk about the difficulties and the dangers that lay before us. Should we undertake the conquest of Canaan? Should we? We should. But they didn't think so. They spoke of powerful nations that lived there. They told us of walled cities that were very great and protected by high walls. And then they reported that in their opinion, it would be impossible to conquer the land. So what did that do to the people who were listening to this conversation? They went on to say that the people who dwelt in the walled cities were very strong, and it would be impossible to conquer them. And you could see in the faces of the people listening in the vast crowds there, as their excitement over my report was lost in the report of the 10 spies who came back with a bad report. They told the people, "We've even seen giants in the land, the sons of Anak. How can we fight against giants?" And then they said, "It's useless to even think about possessing this land." The excitement was gone. The scene changed from hope and courage to cowardly despair. Satan seemed to take over the minds of the people, and the mighty power of God, who had promised to fight for them, was forgotten. The scenes of Pharaoh's army being destroyed by God's power were forgotten. Each of the 10 plagues were forgotten. They acted like it was their power that would take the land, but now they had decided that it was impossible to do this. They limited the power of God and distrusted his ability to do the conquering for them. He had just demonstrated that when the walls of the sea parted and came down and destroyed Pharaoh's entire army, he had demonstrated his power. Did the people really think that they would do the fighting and the conquering? No, God would. But that was forgotten, and they began murmuring against Moses and Aaron. I watched all of this unfold, and I finally couldn't keep quiet any longer. I stood in defense of God and did all I could do to counteract the evil influence that was being reported. For a brief moment, the people listened to what I was saying. But it was just for a moment. I didn't counteract the reports because the cities were big. The walls were very high. The cities were very powerful. But God has promised us the land, I said. So I said, let's go up at once and possess it. For we are well able to overcome if we let God do the fighting for us. The other 10 spies interrupted me and continued to discount my word. They persuaded the people to turn against me and Joshua and Moses and Aaron, but ultimately against the God of heaven. Revolt and mutiny quickly followed. Satan had their minds in his grip. They cursed Moses and Aaron and cried out, "Would that we had died in the land of Egypt." But then they started thinking, we had it good in Egypt. Really? They forgot how miserable it was. But they said, our needs were met. It'd be better for us to return to Egypt. So let's choose a new leader who can lead us back to Egypt. They actually chose somebody to lead them back to the land of bondage and suffering. In great distress, Moses and Aaron fell to the ground and tore their clothing as they were just mourning over this whole situation. They just plain didn't know what to do to stop this open rebellion. Joshua and I began running through the crowds, trying to talk them out of these crazy plans that they were doing. But they would not stop. In fact, they spoke even louder against Joshua and I. And the cry rang out to stone us. The insane mob began to seize rocks. And with the 10 unfaithful spies leading the way, they rushed towards us with the intent to kill us. But suddenly, their voices ceased. Our focus was on this crowd. The stones dropped from their hands. They began to shake with fear. And that's when we turned around to see if we could see what was going on. And God had intervened to stop their murderous plan. And when we turned, we saw the glory of the presence of God, like a flaming night, illuminated the tabernacle. Everyone present in the gathering saw the brightness of the presence of God in the tabernacle. God had revealed himself to Moses on Mount Sinai, and he was revealing himself to everyone there in that crowd as they saw the brightness of his presence. No one dared continue in their path of resistance, in their plan to stone me and Joshua and to head back to Egypt. At that point, Moses needed some advice from God, so he got up from the ground and he entered the tabernacle. God wasn't happy, and he let Moses know that right away. He said, I will smite them with a pestilence. I will disinherit them. I will make a greater nation of you, Moses. But Moses again pleaded with God for the people. He didn't want them to be destroyed. So he appealed to God's mercy and said, Lord, I plead with you. I know you are long-suffering and of great mercy. Pardon the iniquity of this people according to thy greatness and thy mercy, and forgive them. God agreed to do this again and spare them from immediate destruction. But because of the reports that it was impossible to take the land, he was not able to subdue the power of the people that lived in that land. So he said the only safe course is to turn back toward the Red Sea and into the desert. Now remember, these people had declared, would God that we had died in the wilderness or in Egypt, when they said it was impossible to conquer the promised land. So God said, I will answer their prayer. Because of your unbelief, you will die in this wilderness. So everyone who participated in this rebellion would die. So if you were 20 years of age or older, that means you would die in the next 40 years in the wilderness. And only those younger would eventually enter the promised land. And then God addressed to me. And when he said my name, I was kind of taken back. He said, my servant Caleb, because you had another spirit with you and have followed me fully, I will bring you into the land where you went with the spies, and those of your lineage will possess the land. It made me feel pretty special. I didn't deserve special treatment. I was just trying to follow what God had instructed me to do. But he honored me in this way. As the spies spent 40 days exploring the promised land, so the children of Israel would wander in the desert for 40 years. At this pronouncement, their rage turned to mourning. They knew this punishment was just, and the 10 unfaithful spies, they were divinely smitten with a plague, and they perished before our eyes. It was like a fast progressing leprosy that just killed them quickly. The decree God had given that Israel would not be allowed to enter Canaan for 40 years was a bitter disappointment to Moses, Aaron, and Joshua and me. We accepted the divine decision, but unfortunately, Israel did not. They mourned for the judgment, but their sorrow was not because of repentance. They could not reverse the 40-year sentence to wander in the wilderness. When God had told them to go and take the land, they had refused. Now he was directing them to retreat. And what did they do? They rebelled again and decided to go and try to take the promised land on their own. And maybe God would accept their desire now and change his decree and help them take the land. We couldn't believe what they were saying. Satan was still leading them in rebellion against God. They had distrusted the power of God to work with their efforts to gain possession of Canaan. And now they presumed upon their own strength to accomplish the work, independent of divine aid. Now notice, God never once commanded them to go up and fight. This was not his purpose, that they should gain the land by warfare, but by strict obedience to what he was telling them. Remember, he had said, I will fight for you. In spite of God's command to retreat, they prepared to undertake the conquest of Canaan. Equipped with armor and with weapons of war, they were, in their own estimation, fully prepared for the conflict. But they were sadly deficient in the sight of God. And believe me, Moses and Aaron and Joshua and I could see that deficiency too. Fast forward to 40 years in the future, when God directed them to enter the promised land and take Jericho. What happened? He promised to go with us. The ark containing the law was carried before our armies. We were directing their movements under divine supervision. With such guidance, no harm could come to us. Why? Because God was with us. But now, contrary to the command of God and with our words, do not do this. Without the ark and without Moses, they went out to meet the armies of the enemy. As they passed by, Moses gave one final warning. The Lord is not with you to protect you from being smitten by your enemies. The Amalekites and the Canaanites are there before you, and you will fall by their swords. And that's what happened. The army of Israel was utterly defeated. Destruction and death was the result of this rebellious act. The sad thing is that the inhabitants of Canaan, who had heard that these people had special protection from their God, a mysterious power that guarded them, they saw no evidence of that power that day. And they were encouraged that if these guys come after us, we don't have to worry. We can easily take them. They can't do anything. So nothing remained but for Israel to fall back from the face of their victorious foes and into the wilderness to accept their fate. There are many more parts to the story of that 40 years in the wilderness that I'd like to share, but time won't allow that. But fast forward 40 years to the end of that journey. God takes Moses up to the top of the mountain. Just remember, he had not obeyed God and he had struck the rock when God said, speak to it. And God couldn't just pass over that disobedience. So Moses was told he would not be able to enter the promised land. But God takes him up to the top of the mountain, and he shows him what the land will be. He gives him a glimpse of the future of mankind, even down through your time. And Moses gets to see that God wins. And the people get the promised land. He was shown wonderful things, and then he died, and the angels buried his body. Joshua was appointed the new leader, and although he questioned his ability to lead the people and was quite fearful, God said, I was with Moses, so I will be with you, Joshua. I will not fail you nor forsake you. Joshua's first task as leader was to cross the Jordan River and take Jericho. You remember the story. God told him every step, and he obeyed every step. The priests carrying the ark waded into the river. God parted the waters of the river. Remember, this was flood season. It was raging at that time. And God parted the waters, and the encampment walked through on dry land. And then God told him how to take Jericho. It was not by their power, but it was by God's power. They followed his plan, and God delivered the city into their hands. And that was the first of many victories to come. And I obtained the inheritance upon which my heart had been set for 40 years, because I had seen the land when I went through as a spy. I had tasted the grapes. And I finally got to taste them again in my new home. What do I want you to remember from my story today? Listen carefully. God will do great things for those who trust in him. I'm going to say that again. God will do great things for those who trust in him. He will help his believing children in every emergency if they will place their entire confidence in him and faithfully obey him. He was faithful to me, and I promise you, he will be faithful to you. Join me as we sing our closing hymn. Why don't you stand with me? Anywhere with Jesus I can safely go. Anywhere he leads me in this world below. Anywhere without him dearest joys would fade. Anywhere with Jesus I am not afraid. Anywhere, anywhere, fear I cannot know. Anywhere with Jesus I can safely go. Anywhere with Jesus I am not alone. And is still my own. Though his hand may lead me over dreary ways, anywhere with Jesus is a house of praise. Anywhere, anywhere, here I cannot go. Anywhere with Jesus I can safely go. Anywhere with Jesus I can go to sleep. when the gloomy shadows round about me creep, knowing I shall wake and nevermore to roam. Anywhere with Jesus will be home, sweet home. Anywhere, anywhere, fear I cannot know. Anywhere with Jesus I can safely go. Please pray with me. Oh, Father God, we can learn so much from the stories that are found in your word. And I just pray today that we will become students of your word, so that as the world continues to fall apart, we won't be like the unfaithful spies and cave in to the pressure, but that we will be like Caleb and Joshua, and we will hold on to you, and you will walk us through whatever path that you have for us to take. Father, help us to carry the promises that you've given us as we leave this place this morning and as we enter into a new week tomorrow. May we learn to rely on you more, and may we hear your voice. In your name, amen.